And today, so the idea is to, I also wanted to say good afternoon, everyone, and those who are joining us today. So today, what I want to do is to share a little bit of some of the experiences on my research. Not sure, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, Professor.
What can you see?
The
There is
first
a title.
slide with very
See
nice
the
name.
PowerPoint?
Mhm.
All right, you can see the PowerPoint. All right, because I can't see you, but I can see the PowerPoint. All right, so you guys let me know if you are seeing my PowerPoint. Is that okay? You're seeing my PowerPoint, the title and all of that?
Yeah,
Okay,
full
great.
screen.
So, okay, so thank you for this kind invitation. And I have to start by stating that by no means I consider myself an expert on the topic of decolonial thinking or issues of social justice. I've been digging into interculturality for the last couple of years. And so the intention today is to share and start, as indigenous communities say, weaving together, tejiendo, right? Better understandings of what it is to engage in decolonial work. And the perspective of today is of more of a personal kind of like perspective of it, although I'll talk a little bit about research. And so I want to talk about context. I cannot insist more. Everybody seems to know that, or like assuming that we all know this, but every time I want to nail this of saying we have to be very aware of how diverse we are, our country is. And so if you look at the demographic configuration of our country, you see that mostly we are mestizo, but we also have NARP, as you can see on screen, Negro, Afro-Colombiano, Raizal, Palenquero, and then we have Rom as a small population of Rom or Gypsy people. Obviously, these numbers you see on screen have changed slightly since 2020 when I got these statistics, but nowadays we're talking about 50,000 people. I want to highlight here that Colombia, depending on the source you go to, will tell you we have around 115 indigenous pueblos and 65, some other people say 63 indigenous communities, languages, right? Indigenous languages. This is the university I work for, Universidad del Valle. Um, this is in Cali, as you know, this university holds more than 30,000 students. And since 2010, more than 1,100 students, indigenous, have enrolled in different programs of the university. As you can see, more than 200 undergraduate programs we have. So this is a big university with different branches all through Valle del Cauca and part of Cauca. This is the demographics of indigenous communities within the university, especially the branch of Cali. And so you see, we have students from different departments in Colombia. Most of our students come from Nariño, as you can see here, Pastos, right? We also have students from Cauca, Valle del Cauca, and most of those students are um, NASA, Yanacona, and we also have Misak. They mostly come from those departments. And then we have small numbers of students coming from other parts of the country like Putumayo. So that's kind of like the demographics of the university. Up until 2012, we had more than 1,100 students. Now that number has grown because it's growing like 50 or 60 students per semester. And so first I'm going to refer to how I got involved, because you may be wondering why someone who is a teacher of English ended up, involved with this decolonial stuff and with research with indigenous students and all of that. Um, maybe you know that I am the chair of the major in ELT education of the doctoral program of my university. It's an interinstitutional program, Pedagógica Distrital and Universidad del Valle. And so like one of the main areas of research we have in the doctoral program is intercultural communication. And so, like of the different seminars we offer, back in 2018, when we got to fourth semester, I remember that I said, okay, so why don't we have someone to teach a class on critical interculturality and the colonial theories. I knew that at the time, my colleague Jaime Usma was digging into the idea of the colonial theories. So I invited him, right, to teach a seminar in the university, and I also asked him to give a talk about the research he was conducting in his university. So he was doing research with indigenous students at Universidad de Antioquia. And so he brought up the topic of, all right, so we were also wondering, why are you doing research with indigenous students? And so he brought up, like all of the challenges of indigenous students learning English, but also staying in the university. And so his talk and all of the things they were doing to make the university more inclusive, um, and more welcoming to diversity was really inspiring to us, right? It was really enlightening. And what I was thinking is that, I, as a teacher of English, I had been very insensitive, to indigenous students that I had in my classes, and even to Afro-Colombian students that I had in my classes. Not only indifferent and insensitive, but also ignorant of the historical, socioeconomic, and cultural lives and histories of indigenous communities and minoritized communities in Colombia. So, and this talk not only sparked all of these thoughts in me, but also in other colleagues that attended that talk. And so we were left wondering, what we were doing to serve fairly our indigenous students in the language classes of our program, and not only our program, but also at the university level. And so kind of like that's the way the journey started for us, right? So we started a dialogue with different colleagues from different departments, because many of these colleagues attended this meeting, this talk, in the people from philosophy, people from linguistics, people from the French department, and us, people from the English department. And so that's how we said, okay, so why don't we start, getting approaching these in communities within the university, both Afro Colombian descendants and also indigenous groups. And in the university, we have the Indigenous Student Council. Um, and so that's how we started, right? We started the idea of creating a project similar to the one that Jaime Usma had been conducting in his university, and with the general objective of improving student retention and graduation rates, right? And so we thought of three stages of the project. And so one part of it was um, the description of sociolinguistic and academic profile of indigenous students. We didn't know them, right? We didn't know how many they were. We didn't know what programs they were enrolled in. We didn't know anything about them. So how can you do anything if you don't know the narratives of their lives, their identity affiliations, their languages, their expectations, all of these things, their forms of organization, all of these things we wanted to know. So that's the first stage, and that's one we did. Then we also planned a second stage, in which we wanted to identify academic challenges, and at the same time design a proposal to increase retention and graduation rates. And finally, we wanted to intervene teachers, the university itself, right? Implement and evaluate those strategies for the preservation, valuation, and integration of cultural semiotic resources of indigenous students that increase as a way to increase retention and graduation rates. So, how are we doing? Are you guys still there? Because I'm only looking at the PowerPoint. I'm not sure if you guys are still there.
Yes, we're following. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
Thank you. So, today I'm just gonna mention this. This is the first part of the project, the first stage of the macro project. And so this is like the main question: what is the sociolinguistic and academic profile of indigenous undergraduate students at Universidad del Valle? As you can see here, this is us, the three researchers. I mean, we were four researchers, but here with my colleagues, and these are indigenous students, members of the Indigenous Council of the university. So the project was very much co-constructed with them. And so we also had many other questions, who are they? What, what about their family's social and geographic background? What languages they spoke? What relationships did they have with Spanish in the cases of those students who were bilingual because they spoke indigenous languages? What foreign languages do they speak, right? What attitudes do they have or did they have towards English or other foreign languages? What about their academic characteristics, right? How do they perform in general and in particular in languages? How do they perceive their performance, And also, we also wanted to find out whether there was a relationship between the sociolinguistic profile, who they were, and their academic performance, and what kind, right? So what I'm saying is, I'm showing you this, but I'm not going to discuss this, the results or anything. This is a research study that we already concluded. But today's purpose is not, this is just background, right? But today's purpose is more to talk about what I've discovered, about myself and how I feel about it as engaging in a research that had the colonial perspective, right? So, and why am I making a big fuss about this? Because I've received all of the training that I can have in a very westernized view of the world. I had my PhD in the USA. I've done research drawing on all of the theories, perspectives, and epistemologies of the West. So, and after doing this research, all of these things have been shaken, within me. And so this is why I said, all right, so let's share a little bit about all of these things. So, and then I thought that I was going to structure this part of the presentation in these three themes, feeling sentipensante, feeling the territory, and feeling decolonial. Let's go on with the first one. Um, I wanted to start by showing you a video that, caused a lot of impact on me, when I had the opportunity. This is Manuel Usa, right? He is a student of political science, and he's also a medico ancestral, right? And so once I invited him to a talk, or to a conversation or dialogue in my class, in the master's class that I was teaching at the moment, and we asked him about language, and this is what he said. What language is for him and his community. He's Misak, in Misak. They are situated in Silvia Cauca. That's where their territory is. So I'm gonna play this. Oh, you know what, John? I don't remember clicking anywhere to say sharing sound. I'm not sure if you will be able to listen to this, to hear the recording. Shall I try?
Yes, professor. Let's see maybe what happens. Just in case, I'll let you know.
De entender el idioma.
All right.
El
It's fine.
la primera dinámica. You guys, is it okay? The sound?
Yes, professor.
All right.
It's fine.
Tres dinámicas de entender el idioma. La primera dinámica de entender el idioma es el Namjik, que es sale de la boca, de la voz, del tú a tú de las personas, y que tiene su gramática y todo lo demás y permite el entendimiento entre nosotros. Y está el Namuy Guam, el Namuy nuestro Guam voz, digamos nuestras voces del territorio. Y es el lenguaje que yo logro entender, el silbido del pajarito, digamos la voz del viento, la voz de la llama del fuego cuando empieza a indicar algo, y digamos, y la voz del sueño, y de cómo nosotros empezamos a entender otra forma de lenguaje. Entonces hablamos del Namuy Guam. Y ahí luego entonces hay otra forma de comunicación, que es el Cambawa. Cambawa, digamos, ancestral, Guam, voz. Entonces la voz ancestral, la voz de nuestros espíritus mayores, que digamos desde la ancestralidad nos han indicado mundo y la naturaleza. Y a partir de eso se está encontrando figuras en las piedras que dejaron nuestros mayores y permitieron entender el mundo tal y como lo conocemos. Right. Okay, so here's the transcript. If you just want to look at the words he used: Namrik, Namuiwam, Kambawam. So, and then when I think of the way we have, we have been raised to understand language in the West, I realize that we are trapped in this rational paradigm, where, for example, language is a monolithic and a cognitive process that is basically located in our minds, in our head, and that is mobilized by our mouth. This is why the language skills, are listening, speaking, reading, and writing, all of them cognitive acts. But Manuel's description lets us know or see that language goes beyond that rational view, right? And is felt in the wind, in the flames of fire. Language views go beyond verbocentric, typographic, mentalistic conceptions. And this idea doesn't only apply to language, it extends to all indigenous cosmogony. And this is why I use the term sentipensante, or sensing feeling, a term that was introduced by the Colombian sociologist Orlando Fals Borda. If you remember, he heard it from a fisherman who said, we act with our heart, but we also use our head. And when we combine the two in this way, we are sentipensantes, right? Because for indigenous communities, first you feel and then you think. While in the West, the way we have been educated to first, we have to think. Pienso, luego existo, right? According to Descartes. Pienso, luego existo. Pienso, luego siento. But maybe siento, luego pienso, right? So what's funny is that nowadays, social scientists are talking about post-humanism, and post-materialism, if you've heard those concepts. And so what they are presenting these days is as a latest Western scientific discovery in the humanities. And they are saying things like this. Look at this. They are saying language is distributed across different entities and spatio-temporal scales, for example, Thibault, beyond the border of the human. The territory, ancestrality, and spiritism. This is according to Barat and Pennycock, some people who are talking about post-humanism and post-materialism. They say language does not only emerge from a living human being, right? They criticize the European humanism, right? And that European humanism privileges the mind as the primary source of knowledge and language as the central medium for the manifestation of thought. Yeah. They criticize that humanism assumes that humanity is separate and independent from other forms of life, and they conceive that humanity is separate, um, and that agency is a unique property of human beings, right? Post-materialism and post-humanism challenge, the tenets, those tenets of humanism, and they decenter the human and instead examine knowledge, language, identity, and agency by focusing on relations, the relationality, interdependency, and the entanglements of the human, animal, material, or immaterial. And this is fine, you know, but what they should not forget and they should recognize is that what they are saying is what indigenous communities have been saying for centuries. This they are saying is what indigenous communities have been saying. We're so connected, so much, that language, as Manuel says, is three things, not one. Manuel talks about three views of language, right? How language is connected. It connects people, the Nambric. It connects with the territory, but it also connects with the ancestors, the ancestral knowledge, with the ancestors. It's beyond the mind, right? And I think that's beautiful. The second theme is feeling the territory, right? And one of the things that struck me the most, back in the days when I started reflecting about these things, is my lack of connection with the spaces in which I live, the spaces that I inhabit. And this is perhaps because I don't have a sense of belonging or ownership of a territory, right? But indigenous communities, they teach us about this connection all the time due to the connection to their territories and to Mother Nature. I was talking to an indigenous from Peru, I think, and I think she told me something like, usted puede sacar al indio del territorio, pero no puede sacar al territorio del indio, right? And she has the right to say the word indio. That's very profound, right? So in the West, we have created a binary between nature and humans, right? Something that doesn't exist in indigenous communities where human beings, non-human beings, non-living things have a territory that they share together. So students, indigenous students, when they arrive at the university, they always threatened about losing the connection with the territories. For example, when they are moved to universities, and they go through or undergo a process of deterritorialization and also deculturalization, right? And this deterritorialization and deculturation consists of a type of cultural distancing, and weakening of the ties between students' cosmogonies, languages, and traditions, and their social and geographic territories. But what I've seen is that, interestingly, students' diasporic lives in the city and at university do not only follow these paths, of the territorialization and the culturation. They also engage in processes of re-territorialization and production of new spaces of belonging within the new inhabited and sites and social spaces. And this happened in university campuses like in Univalle. Notice that in this slide you see that they have created an indigenous student council. They have organized themselves as a political organization, the CIU, Cabildo Indígena Universitario. And what they do, all right, so they do different things. They have La Casa de Paso, right? Um, they have an office that the university has given them, and they have obtained from the governor a house where they can stay during the first months when they arrive and they haven't settled down in town, in the university and in the city. They have also been able to replicate the rituals of their territories, such as the inauguration ceremony that you see on screen. See, this is the ceremony where the officials of the Indigenous Council, it's a change of command, right? So every year the Indigenous Council has to be re-elected, right? And so they do all of this inauguration ceremony on campus. And they invite people from the territories, and it's a huge event. They also have some other events like the Minga, Pensamiento, and so on. And they were also able to get a piece of land in the university that they call La Chagra. And so as you can see here, they say it's a place to cultivate the mind, you know, it cultivates land. We learn to love La Mama. This is what they say about CIU and the idea of having a chagra, small piece of land. And I love this concept. When I interviewed Emmanuel, he said, we have to submit ourselves to a kind of cosmocracy, which is the power of the cosmos, the power of the universe, and that human beings should be governed by what it establishes, principles and values established by Mother Nature, which, unfortunately, because of not thinking of these things, we have the environmental crisis human beings are facing nowadays. They have also built La Tulpa, which is this big construction, right? And it is used for them to do their rituals and have events, cultural events or political events. And what I think that these activities and this activism they have, engaged in the university is that all of these things involve forms of recontextualization and material and symbolic rearrangements of the university sites and represent practices of reterritorialization because they allow indigenous students to keep the connection to the practices of their territories. But they visibilize their cultural semiotic resources, including their languages, rituals, traditions. Overall, this is counter-hegemonic, it's a counter-hegemonic reconfiguration of spaces which is considered, which is decolonial by itself, right? It enables symbolic restitution, self-affirmation, cultural sustainability, and the transgression of hegemonic and homogenizing politics of universities. This is my last theme. And this is a mural that we took a picture from Universidad Autónoma Indígena Intercultural, which is situated in Popayán, that we actually visited as part of the research project we were conducting, this university and Misak Universidad, which is in Silvia, Cauca. And so my experience is that at the beginning of the project, when you conduct research, you say, okay, so what is the theoretical framework going to be for this project? And then you start saying, oh, we're gonna have to do this theoretical framework. Let's go read about it so we know. And so that's basically how I felt at the beginning. We know that there was something wrong with the situation of indigenous students because they have a higher rate of college dropout. and we thought we could do something, right? But you cannot do anything if you don't have understanding, right? And then if you don't have the power and the arguments to go to the administration and the institution, right, and help them understand, you know. And so we thought, because of the connection with indigenous communities and interculturality, we thought the most proper theoretical perspective was a decolonial perspective. It seemed like the perspective that applied more to the research. But it was initially more in the abstract, because I had been working on critical theories, but being critical is not the same as being decolonial, right? So initially, it seemed more like a perspective that we applied to the research. It was more like a rational take on it. But little by little, as the research progressed, right, we started to feel that the decolonial perspective needed to apply not to the rationality of the theoretical frameworks, but to ourselves, ourselves, right? Um, because at the end, indigenous students, they are decolonial. They understand what it is about because they've lived it, right? They have that historical positioning. They know the colonial mechanisms that have targeted their languages, that have targeted the languages and the cosmogonies and their territories. So little by little, I felt that my experience that was more initially theoretical, rational, became more grounded on sense, seeing, feeling, on sentipensar. And this happened because of the chance that indigenous students gave us to spend time with them, to walk along with them, to engage in dialogue, to have that intercultural encounter. And then I started to understand why they feel and think the way they do it. And I realized how much they can teach us and how little we know about the world and life in general. So, and this brings me to the other point in the discussion here, indigenizing myself. So, some people say that we have to indigenize ourselves, somehow like you gotta go back to your roots, find your lost identity. And so in Colombia, the great majority are like me, are mestizos, right? We are the product of the European mix, the indigenous people and indigenous peoples, right? So indigenous blood runs through our bloods. Um, but that doesn't mean that you have to change yourself overnight and say, I'm just gonna become indigenous, because you have your own identity. And so whether you want to do it or not is an exploration, right, of that indigenous self that must be a personal journey, right? Not just because it's fashionable nowadays that you have to become indigenous or so on. And I think decoloniality opens up the path for this exploration. But I agree with Walter Mignolo, who says that if you want to be decolonial, first you need to know your place in the colonial matrix of power, where you have been situated and classified. Second, you have to remember that the colonial matrix of power cannot be observed from outside, because there is no outside. We are all in it. This is like the matrix, right? Third, once you find yourself within the colonial matrix of power, like you're conscious of that because of your nationality, your religion, your language, your sexuality, your gender, your racialized ethnicity, right? Then you have to see how you can counter or situate yourself within that colonial matrix. What do you want to do with it, right? Fourth, if you decide to embrace the decolonial option, you should know that it is an option, right? Decoloniality is an option, right? It's not whether you want to begin to act, think decolonially, you know, is an option. Do not assume that the decolonial option is the universal best, right? Because then you would be being dogmatic. It's just one option, right? But there may be other options for other people, right? So, okay, so to close, What I have felt, during this journey is that we cannot feel the decolonial as indigenous communities because more than us, they speak from the colonial wound, as the Chicano author Gloria and Saldúa proposes. Indigenous communities and Afro-descendant communities feel it more than us because we have been in a space of privilege and we've been unaware of the forms of coloniality that oppress us and oppress them. And perhaps we will never be able to experience it, that decolonial wound, as indigenous peoples do. However, we need to try to know about it and understand it, be sensitive about it. And I think one way of doing it is by embracing and welcoming the intercultural encounter with our indigenous communities, with minoritized communities. We need to gain this understanding from the biographical, but also the corpo experiential. And I want to cite these two authors, Frischnecht and Borsani, and this is something they say. Es en esa dirección que la dimensión de la herida colonial no se comprende en toda su magnitud si no se sabe de ella desde lo corpobiográfico, desde lo corpovivencial, desde un cuerpo que la siente y la habla. De tal forma, la herida colonial como sentimiento y la frontera como espacio que construyen aquellos que están en los márgenes, en los bordes, habitando la periferia inventada por la centralidad colonial, se siente más que se conoce o solo se la conoce al tiempo que se la siente. La herida colonial, por lo tanto, no es más del orden de lo biográfico, de lo biovivencial, que lo estrictamente teórico reflexivo, aunque claro que no está inhabilitada la posibilidad de teorización, pero debe operar algo de lo experiencial para saber de qué estamos hablando y a qué nos referimos cuando referimos a dicha herida colonial. Entonces, la herida colonial pone en escena padeceres, sentires y experiencias dolientes que surgen de aquello que el paradigma moderno colonial imperial procuró extirpar, como procuró también borrar la memoria de dicho padecer. Unfortunately, the colonial wound does not heal because the practices of discrimination, deterritorialization, assassination, and invisibilization of indigenous communities, Afro-descendants, social leaders, marginalized communities do not reach an end, right? And in many cases, we become complicit with what is happening. So I do think that working with and for minoritized communities is a way of recognizing that we don't want to be complicit in these colonial practices. And I want to conclude my talk by highlighting this part that says, la herida colonial, por lo tanto, es más del orden de lo biográfico, de lo biovivencial, de lo estrictamente teórico-reflexivo, aunque claro que no está inhabilitada la posibilidad de teorización, pero debe operar algo de lo experiencial para saber de lo que estamos hablando. Research has shown that people develop more recognition of diversity, tolerance, and above all, overcome prejudice when we engage in intercultural encounters. The experience of the encounter with others is central for this to happen. Yes, theorizing helps, but I invite people who are talking about diversity and all of these topics to get their feet wet. Work with the communities. Facilitate the encounter of members of communities with their students, with your students, if you are a teacher educator or in a regular class. In other words, this is about for researchers and teachers who do research with communities or about communities to leave their desks. I think we cannot fall in what I've been calling decolonialidad de escritorio. And with this, I conclude this intervention. Thank you very much.
Professor, thank you very much. It has been very interesting to listen to you. And I think we have some time for questions and for interaction with the public, right?
Yes, we do.
So for the attendees, for the professors, for the students who are here, just in case, if you want to make any question, you can feel free to open the microphone, to jump in, and that is totally fine. You can also write in the chat if you prefer, so it's fine. I think that is raising the hand.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Aldemar and Professor John, for opening this space. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can,
Yes.
but I
Hello?
cannot see you. Why? Okay, good. I got you. Now I can see you. Great.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much for this amazing talk. It was really enthralling to me because I'm really into retaking these kinds of indigenous knowledges into our own practices within the academia, the university, and also the different paths that we propose within our undergraduate programs at the university. So I think that it's amazing and that's very great to get to know different ways to approach knowledge because we tend to use the word knowledge as a singular way, yeah, and we forget that we have plenty of them, yeah. So that would be very nice to know different things to address things, to understand the world, to relate one another, yeah, and to also have that strong relationship with nature. So for me it was really enriching to hear this talk. Another thing is that what you mentioned before about history, yeah. So we tend to understand history from a very single point of view, and there is a concept that is called the historization of history. So that's the way when we get to understand different perspectives on the understanding of different colonial practices and the way how they are very linked to the things that we do now, yeah. In the academia, in terms of research, in the interaction that we have with our colleagues, and also the interaction that we have with our students. So that's amazing to understand some other perspectives and also to open more spaces for those communities to be part of our programs, to be part of our experiences as teachers and also as students. So thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you, Daina.
Professor Marcela has a question, so you're free to open the microphone and jump in. It's fine.
Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Professor Aldemar, for your speech. I really loved the way that you presented that proposal to integrate the indigenous communities in our universities. And also, I just want to congratulate you because I, in my doctoral program, I am trying to get information about how the professors of the International Institute in the UPTC try to maybe involve communities, different students from different communities. But some of the answers at the beginning were so like I didn't know where they come from or something like that. But there were other students that are studying the master in the UPTC, and I love the way that they restart decolonizing the way that maybe they learned how to teach a language and how to teach a hegemonic language as English. And they talk that they have tried to integrate some students and maybe students, not just students, or maybe people that talk an indigenous language in their classes of English, sorry, and talk about Englishes. They also talk about that. And I think that it's an amazing opportunity to restart like a change in the paradigm that we are teaching or maybe the education, the process of education that students have had in the universities. And also to reinforce, not just when they have the opportunity to do a master, because most of them that are really doing like integrating other communities or minority communities or toward your intercultural, critical interculturality. So it's just when they have the opportunity to continue with their professional development. I don't like that maybe in our program, Licenciatura, they can't be involved and restart decolonizing the way that we have been taught, the the way that we teach lingua franca, and maybe involve other diversity, language diversity, or cultural diversity, and integrating those communities, and maybe also made students feel unindigenous, because I remember one of my participants answers that they talk about one of my students realized that he was an indigenous person, but the problem was that they don't like to talk about that because the others don't understand what means to be an indigenous person. So these kind of things, I think that we can be continue working and improving in our program. So I am feel so excited with this presentation because it really connected with my project in the PhD, and I think that we can continue working in this program in the UPTC and other programs, and maybe to have an impact in the languages policies in our country.
Thank you very much, Marcela. Very interesting what you say. Yeah, hopefully, little by little, once we um, reach a good understanding of what all of this means, I think that would give us the license and the possibilities to start implementing or bringing this to our language classrooms.
Yes.
If there is any other question, comment, you are free to jump in. It's fine.
Well, good afternoon. I just want to say a couple of things. Thank you, Jose, for this very interesting and important presentation. And I think it is something that there are many things that call my attention, specifically where the context where I work. And I think that many questions emerged, starting by the world knowledge, because as we had been the product of these eh, mm, of this idea of centering the power in basically first the teacher, but second also people who are considered to be part of the community where you work. And I think that it is very interesting and very important for us to start asking first um, if we are really acknowledging all kind of knowledges that we have when we come in contact with our students, and much more thinking or having very clear the idea that we are in this process of licenciaturas, like teacher education programs, in which of course the decisions we make, and not only curricular, but the decisions like now with all these certification processes might affect all the ideas that we have around that, about power, about knowledge. And I think that a very important way to start these questions that we have to ask ourselves is, to what extent on the one hand we are silencing the voices of students um, who are not considered part of our community because of different reasons. Yeah, I think that ethnicity is very important. It's very important to be taken into account, but there are other reasons that I have witnessed in these 17, almost 17 years that I have been working here. And it's, for example, the idea of origin, and to what extent we teachers are not considering the knowledge and the students' uh, um, way of acting, way of being, their identity, just because they are not boyacenses, just because they are not upetecistas, and just because they are not in the parameters that we have constructed ourselves to what a good or an efficient student is. And the other thing is something very important that I think that because of that exclusion that we have probably practiced, uh, we have played this role of colonizing again. Yeah, like these processes, these certification processes always try to lead people to say first things that we do not have, to try to cover what we consider that are weaknesses that might not be weaknesses, like for example how diverse our students are, and trying to ignore those voices of those students who might need to be, to be listened. So I think that that is a very interesting invitation for our context and for the time that we are living. with these all these academic reforms and things that are really getting into our nerves, or at least into my nerves. Thank you, Jose.
Thank you, Alida. Yes. Yeah, the question of knowledge is really complicated. In the history of knowledge, as Daira was saying, we have to think of the historicity of knowledge. Um, in all subjects we teach, I was saying, I'm teaching these days. I'm teaching a second language acquisition class, right? And so, you know, basically the knowledge is already established there, and then I say, okay, so like who talked about this initially? It's a bunch of people who initially said, all right, so let's look at how we learn and we acquire languages, and so how we acquire language is gonna be like the model. So you see, like the first people who talk about the thing, they are the ones who impose the model. They are the ones who establish the matrix, and then the matrix is taken to be applied to other sites, and that's how asymmetry, discrimination arises. Because if I say, all right, this is how we acquire languages, and so if you're not within these parameters, you are linguistically behind, right? And then I'm saying, yeah, because that's kind of like the matrix you created yourselves, right? And now you're applying the same framework to other people. And when you think of colonialism, it's basically the same. What race was first? Oh, we said we were the first white, educated, Judeo-Christian, right? And so that's kind of like the model we're gonna take everywhere. Yes. So if we think, or you know what I was saying, like at least if think about it, and we are in a colonial continuum, the colonial matrix. Kind of like think about where you would like to situate. Even if you want to be a racist, at least know where you are standing, right? Um, Chances are something out of this, makes you double think what you're saying and thinking, and maybe you change, right? But um, having the possibility of questioning, knowledge and historicity of knowledge, possible will allow for doors, little doors or lines for diversity, for, oh, maybe you're not just behind, you're just diverse, like, because you do not match this framework that someone established because it was very convenient and matched their community, and then you're another community. Um so that's number one. Number two is what I was saying, and let me give you just one example. I think it's very important. I was mentioning that research has shown, research in stereotypes and prejudice has shown that when people are exposed to diversity firsthand, they tend to modify their thinking and their behaviors faster than people that are convinced only by arguments, rational arguments, like you trying to convince your students, don't be racist, everybody's equals, and all of these things. But they are not experiencing that. They are not experiencing different sources of knowledge, different discourses, and all of that. And I always think like you try to expose your students and expose yourselves to diversity, because this is what I discovered myself in the research that I'm saying. I think I would have never felt what I felt if I hadn't got in touch with indigenous communities. I could have read all the books about discrimination and all of these things. It's not the same, you see? And let me tell you just one example that happened to me yesterday, by the way. You know that May is in May we celebrate the day of Afro-Colombianidad, right? And so my daughter, she is in 11th grade, and she sends me a message totally upset saying, Dad, look at this. We are having like an organization of the Dia de Afrocolombianidad. And so for some reason, the topic started, and one classmate is saying that Afro-Colombians, that he inherited 10 slaves from his family because his family used to be wealthy and they had, and so he is basically, his discourse is basically replicating that discourse of, societies should have slaves, because there are people who are superior and some those who are inferior, and those who are inferior should serve. Something like that was the discourse. And then um, and then I said, okay, so what are you guys planning to do your celebration of Afro-Colombianidad? So we're gonna do dances. We're gonna have danza de música Colombiana. And we're also gonna do like choosing one major figure that is Afro, and we're gonna talk about him or her. And so you see, and they say, what's going on here? This is diversity of escritorio, you know? And then I say, why don't you invite an Afro-Colombian, a lideresa, or un líder Afro-Colombiano that talks with you, that tells you all his fights or their fights, their struggles, that shares with you firsthand what is it to be a black person in Colombia, right? And so she said, oh, like I'm gonna talk to the teacher, right? And so she went to the teacher this morning and told him, look, why don't we invite someone from the Afro-Colombian community to talk about this? Un líder, un líder. And so, and I told her, you do the job in school and I do my job or finding the person. So she wrote this morning telling me that, yes, he said yes. The social studies teacher said yes, that they are interested, and so on and so on. Right away, I called a friend of mine in Oficina de Asuntos in Étnicos of the university, and I said, look, we have this opportunity to go to a school to talk to these high-class kids who very far away from reality of what it is to be an Afro-Colombian. Would you be interested in going and talking with them and sharing and so on and so on? And so yeah, wonderful. I can go there. And I said, like, okay, good. So this is what we have to do, right? And this isn't the first time I do it. I took the Indigenous Council of the university to the same school a couple of months ago because it was exactly the same. And we went, they talked about um, um, a medicina ancestral. They did and they talked and they got firsthand. Okay, so either students open up a little more their minds or they reinforce stereotyping. Yes, but we gotta give them the option. You see, first-hand encounter with diversity works more than talking about diversity in the abstract. So I really vouch for that option because this is how I have experienced it. It chakens you more when you have that option rather than someone telling you be good, be diverse, be tolerant towards diversity, and so on and so on. So I'm inviting you, you know, besides, upholding the argument and the perspective, integrate in your classes that kind of diversity. And if you're not part of that, integrate yourself to diversity, you know? Find ways to engage yourself with intercultural encounters with diversity. Okay, so I think our time is up. John?
Yes, Professor. I would like to give like a final comment. I would like to make it, and I think that the coloniality implies going beyond like theoretical like conceptualizations and information and articles and research in general. So coloniality should be like a way of being, no, and a way of acting itself. So, Professor, thank you very much. It has been very enriching to listen to you as always. You know that I admire you a lot. You have been one of those role models, and I truly appreciate your like collaboration in this process we are like opening here at the School of Languages. So, Professor, thank you very much a lot, and we really appreciate your talk, your wisdom, and everything you have like shared with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this invitation, and I'm happy to see you, all of those who I already know, and glad to see some other people that I haven't seen around, but hopefully we'll see sometime. Take care, everyone. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you so
Thank
much.